First of all, I want to welcome all of you to come to MCC and on a very important meeting, and I will go into that a little detail. At this time, I will request our Palestinian Imam Tarif Sharain to come and say dua for us. And Brother Tarif.
Greetings of peace and good afternoon. Salam Alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
Really welcome to all these beautiful souls that are present with us tonight. My name is Tarif Shrain. On behalf of my beautiful community here, family in MCC, that is really a home to myself and my family, to all these souls and our guests and our speakers as well, welcome to this to our home here. It's your home, and I'm not going to take long. Just kind of intro remarks, inshallah, segueing into the panel, the discussion, and to hear the stories and so on and so forth. I'm not only an imam, but I'm also, as you heard, I'm also Palestinian. So all of us are going through a dark phase in our lives, really, and it's taken a toll on all of us. And really, the scale of the suffering that is unfolding in Gaza right now, in the West Bank, in Palestine, is unconscionable. I myself have lost some family members. My cousin, who's a young doctor, actually just graduated, 25 years of age, from Jordan, went back to Jenin to practice. At dawn, at Fajr, he goes to save someone who was shot, and they kill him. And his brother got injured. But I cannot honestly imagine the scale of the loss for our dear sister, Leila. People have lost brothers and sisters, 30, 40, 50 members of their families in this real genocide that is unfolding. I cannot imagine their pain. I cannot imagine their loss. I cannot imagine the scale of the trauma that has been left on their souls and the souls of humanity as we witness this thing unfolding as we speak right now. There are bombs being dropped on our brothers and sisters, our families and us right now. Right now, children are losing their lives. Right now, their bodies are being broken. Right now, they have nowhere to go. And before we proceed, the question that I honestly ask myself throughout this, because this is a historic moment, this is a watershed moment, this is a moment that we need to ask ourselves as we sit and listen. The question is, what does this moment demand? When you witness suffering, when you witness loss, when you witness crimes against humanity, these are real human beings who are losing their souls. Children, women, the elderly, homes are being decimated. In the face of all of this, what does this moment call us to? What does faith call us to? What does morality call us to? What is ethics? What does everything we've learned in faith demand of us in this moment? It's even a question for me. I had to be awakened out of my comfort to really say, where is my voice? And imagining my own children, my family going through this. On all sides. Human lives matter, brothers and sisters. You matter. Your presence right here tonight, and I really mean it, is so uplifting and inspiring. May that be a moment that testifies for you. May that be a moment of awakening for you. That we no longer just hear the stories, witness the videos and the images, but may our faculty, our voices, our hearts, our souls be moved vigorously in becoming a voice for the voiceless, in saving lives now before tomorrow. God bless all of you. Welcome again, and may our hearts be sincere in our presence here as we hear everything, and may we internalize these messages that it moves us vigorously in the service of the cause of justice, in the service of saving human lives, expeditiously, vigorously, and courageously. Thank you very much. God bless all of you. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you, Imam Tarif. Thank you very much. Let me introduce myself. I'm Ashra Sufi. I'm a retired gastroenterologist, and I was the past president of MCC, and now I'm the chair of the Interfaith Committee. I want to welcome all of you to be here. A few announcements. Number one, being senior and old, the first thing I want to let you know where the restrooms are. And the restrooms are on the hallway, just in the mid-side. Secondly, we will encourage the questions, but we will like the question to be put on a paper and give it to the people who will be taking your question and giving it to the speakers. Thirdly, I would like to make sure that you enjoy the food. The food is from two Palestinian restaurants. One is the Olive Lounge, and the other one is Z&Z Manashi Bakery. And both of them are very well recognized the Palestinian owned Palestinian Christian owned restaurants. And please enjoy, and I want to thank them for helping us to bring all the food and everything. And finally, I would like to say that this is an important moment where we are really have very distinguished speakers. They are well known, and you have, I have been sending you the flyer, and the most important thing is a very recognized speaker, which they will be introduced and their biography will be given to you. But briefly is Dr. Imad-ad-Dean, Ahmad. Secondly, Sister Laila El-Haddad, and then Farah, who is the founder of the Palestinian Christian Alliance for Peace. Imad-ad-Dean is the president of Minaret of Freedom Institute, and Laila is award-winning Gazan author, a political analyst and documentarian. And the last but not the least is Leah Harris. She is a Jewish American writer, facilitator, and advocate. So with that, I will like to introduce to our President of Board of Director, Brother Usman Sarwer. Usman.
Good afternoon. Salam Alaikum for those of you here. Welcome for our guest. My name is Usman Sarwer. I am the president of the board of directors of the Muslim Community Center. And I want to welcome everybody for this important, sensitive discussion that we'll be having and presentation. We just would like to, create a platform and a forum because we know that there's a lot of, voices that need to be amplified. So I don't want to take up too much time. I actually just wanted to give a thank you shout out to a few people. Number one is our Interfaith Committee Chair, Dr. Sufi, and his team for putting together this program. I'm going to ask them to stand up if they can, just because they put in quite a lot of hard work behind the scenes to make this happen. Brother Sabar Rahman, if you don't mind standing up, he's also a longtime member of the Interfaith Committee. Sister Aisha, if you raise your hand. Tasnuva, I think, is around here helping to organize the program and the speakers, and we hope that you find good information from this. And welcome again. Thank you.
I want to personally thank all the Interfaith Committee members, Brother Saber, Sister or Dr. Tasnuva Ahmad, and Sister Aisha, and Sister Deba, Dr. Samif Jafri, Sukai, Sister Sukai, as well as Sister Karen Bashir. If I forgot some name, please forgive me. And we have worked tirelessly for last few weeks to arrange this meeting, and I want to thank all of them. At this time, I'll also like to invite the chair of the Board of Trustees, Sister Lubna, who is a very dear member and dear colleague of mine for last so many years. Thank you, Sister Lubna. Come on.
Assalamu Alaikum. I'll be very brief because my speech was written by somebody else in our Board of Trustees. So he will be the one welcoming you formally. But a lot of you are new here. My name is Laila El-Haddad, and I'm the chair for the Board of Trustees for this center. So I wanted to welcome you, and I want to turn it over to one of our fellow trustees, Sabir Rahman, who is also a part of the Interfaith Committee. He is more into this event today, and so I'd like to give the floor to him. Thank you.
Assalamu Alaikum. I think the welcome is already done. I don't know what I'm doing here, but she ordered me to come here, so I'm here. I want to welcome all of you to this Muslim Community Center that has been in existence since 1976 and has been in the forefront of activism like this and hope to continue to do more. I want to recognize Arif Dajani, whose father was one of the founders of this organization. He's a Palestinian also. I just want to say that in Quran, the 4th chapter, An-Nisa, verse 135, commands us to do justice, even against ourselves, even against our mother and father, even against our close relatives, and even against the rich and poor. And this commandment is not for those of us who call ourselves Muslims, it's for the humanity. Let's remember that. Thank you very much.
At this time, I would like to introduce our moderator. I would again please request that when the speakers are talking, no interruption, no question while they are talking. If you want to ask any question, please raise your hand. You will be given a card, and you write your question and give it to the person who is giving you the card, and then they will bring it to the speakers. I will really appreciate that. With that, I will like to introduce our moderator. I am very much proud to announce Dr. Yassine Daoud, who, like me, is a physician, and he is an internationally known eye surgeon and cornea specialist. Served as the chair of ophthalmology at Howard County General Hospital and assistant professor of ophthalmology at Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. Dr. Daoud grew up in a Palestinian refugee camp in Lebanon between 1976 to 1993 and witnessed the Lebanese Civil War. He came to the US for college and stayed here to complete his medical degree, residency, and fellowship, eventually settling here in Maryland. Dr. Daoud is a frequent speaker in area Muslim communities and serves as a mentor and advisor to local Muslim university student groups. I will ask Dr. Daoud to please come over and take the podium. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum, greetings of peace to all of you. Thank you so much for coming on a rainy Sunday afternoon. There's nothing better that I would think of doing than speaking on behalf of Gaza and the people of Palestine, that we are the voice of the voiceless. I would like to start just a very quick thing, which is what I want to say is, to be honest, Gaza and the Gazan people do not need our cries or sympathies. If anything, they have inspired us, they have awakened us, they have empowered us, they have become the conscious of our humanity, and they are they have really redirected to a great point our moral compass. When the issue of Gaza and Palestine started, and by the way, it did not start on October 7th, nor October 6th, nor October 8th. We have, as a person, I grew up, I was born a refugee. So, and I can tell you that I was born before October 7th, that's for sure. The issue, as we say, if you are attuned to the suffering of one people but not the other, then your compass is broken, so is your humanity. So you really have to check what compass do you use. For that, what we really need is Gaza needs us to learn about it, to learn how to love it, to learn how to appreciate it, to learn how to admire it, and to be taught by it, but also to become its voice, because unfortunately, its voice hasn't reached us. One great example is the grandfather Khalid. You probably all have known, Ya Ruh al-Ruh, you are the soul of my soul. The American and Western media has spent literally billions of dollars to tell us that somebody who has a turban and a long beard is our definition of terrorist. And then all of a sudden, just a simple human being, a single human being, with a true love, with a true faith, with a true acceptance of qada'illah, of what Allah has dictated upon him, and unfortunately what a ruthless occupation has brought down to him to steal some of his most beloved on earth, the way he actually exemplified what it means to love and what it means to hold dear and tight, taught us what a beautiful human being looks like. So when we look at the grandfather Khalid, we no longer look at this Muslim weird-looking guy, a bearded guy, as, okay, this is somebody that I worry about. He became somebody who I actually find solace in. And these are the narratives that Gaza has taught us. It has reminded us and it has redirected us to say, where are we? So I'm the moderator. I'm not supposed to be talking too much. So for that, I will start. I am a refugee, that is correct, but guess what? I was born on land. There are some refugees that no countries wanted them and no countries were receiving them, or they were running away and they were born in the middle of the sea. And that is our very first speaker, Dr. Imad-ad-Dean Ahmad. That not even a land was enough for you, that you had to be carried in the belly of the ocean. And every home is your home. We actually have a saying in Palestine. We say that everybody lives inside of their homeland, except the Palestinian, their homeland lives inside of them. And with that, Dr. Imad-ad-Dean has been exemplary to be the Palestinian that carries Palestine wherever he goes and whatever he does. And he carries the beauty and the humanity of his faith in everything that he does. So he graduated with a Ph.D. from the University of Arizona. He inspires all of us through all of his frequent speeches in matters relating to Islam and Muslims. He is a renowned author and has received several awards. He actually works on Zakah, which is a charity to help those who are most needy and desolate. And the people of Gaza are not really needy in the sense that they are needy, but they are intentionally impoverished. That's the difference. Gaza is an incredibly rich port. It is one of the major cities of the old world, but it has been, people have tried to bring it to its knees, but just like every Palestinian, it still rises. With that, Dr. Imad-ad-Dean Ahmad is going to rise and arise us with his phenomenal inspirational talk. Dr. Imad-ad-Dean, the floor is yours. Jazakumullah khair. I'll give you 5 minutes warning. I'm sorry? I'll give you 5 minutes when it's due. It's 15 minutes. Take your time, but I'll give you 5 minutes warning.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Peace be upon you. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I bear witness that there is no God but God, and that Muhammad is his messenger and servant. Brother was kind enough to answer the first question I was going to address, who I am. As he said, I was born a Palestinian refugee. But I'm going to add that I'm 75 years old, so I'm as old as the state of Israel. It was during the Nakba, as my mother fled to the United States, that I was born on the boat. And I'm going to begin by, because of the time limits, it's going to be a very, very brief history of Palestine. I want to emphasize one point. If you take away nothing else from this first part of my talk, take this away. Palestine is an integrated cultural entity. It is a collective people who have their own language, their own dialect of Arabic, their own food, their own way of dressing. And they have been this way for a very, very long time, hundreds of years. Why do I emphasize this? And by the way, I believe there's supposed to be displays here. Sister Samira has brought some stuff that you can see the Palestinian culture for yourself. But why is this so important? Because one of the many lies that is used to denigrate the rights of the Palestinian people is the claim that there is no Palestine. This claim, which is absurd on the face of it, is justified because there never has been an independent Palestinian nation state. The reason there's never been an independent Palestinian nation state is because for most of its history, the land was occupied. In the Middle Bronze Age, there were independent Canaanite city-states, and therefore it was called the land of Canaan. Those of you familiar with the Bible have heard the expression, the land of Canaan, because this is where the Canaanites lived. But it was occupied then by the Egyptians. It was occupied by the people, by the children of Israel. It was occupied by the Assyrians. It was occupied by the Babylonians. It was occupied by the Persians. It was occupied again by the Egyptians, by the Greeks, by the Romans, by the Byzantines, by the Arabs, by the Fatimids, the Seljuks, the Crusaders, the Ayyubids, the Mamluks, the Mongols, the Ottomans, and the British. Now, if that doesn't make my point clear enough, let me add something else. The whole concept of the nation state is a modern concept developed by the Treaty of Westphalia to try to put an end to the 30 and 80 years wars, and develop the concept that the world should be divided up into these nation states. All right? So the fact that Palestine was not a nation state before 1648 is utterly meaningless. Since then, it was occupied, as I said, by the Ottomans and then by the British, and now by the Zionists. All right. I want to bring one point from this series of occupations because it brings up another important point takeaway. The next important takeaway I want you to take away from this talk is that this is not a religious conflict. It is a conflict over occupying land. And to emphasize this, I want to point out that when the Arabs conquered Palestine, and of course it was the Muslim conquest, the Arabs at that time were Muslims, and it was Umar who entered the city, and the city at that time was primarily Christian because the Romans had kicked the Jews out of the city of Jerusalem. Umar made a treaty with the indigenous Christians in which he said that they would be free to worship, free to live, free to work, free to raise their families. And but he did not say that he would keep the Jews out. And the reason he did not say that is because he couldn't. The Quran says that the people of the book, which includes the Jews and the Christians, as long as they are law-abiding citizens who pay their taxes, have all the human rights, especially the ones I mentioned, the right to raise your family, to practice your religion, and to earn a living. So he wouldn't keep the Jews out if the Jews wanted to come as individual residents of the city. And this was typical. Now, Muslims have their flaws. We're not perfect people, and sometimes we don't follow our religion. But by and large, the respect of the freedom of worship of minority religions was respected throughout the Muslim world, to the degree that that is the reputation, even in the West, of Muslim Spain, contrasted to the rest of Europe, where the Jews were persecuted badly, whereas in Spain, you even had on one occasion a Jewish prime minister, a grand vizier. So, and when the Christians took over Spain and Ferdinand and Isabella kicked the Jews out, it was the Ottomans who wrote a letter to all the rabbis fleeing from Spain, inviting them to settle in the Ottoman lands, promising them again, your right to raise your family, your right to practice your religion, your right to earn a living. Okay, they weren't being given equal citizenship. But aren't these the three most important things people want? Isn't this why so many of the immigrants who came to this country, isn't that what you wanted? All right. So, now, I come to the modern era, and fortunately, my other co-speakers, and I want to thank the MCC and its committee for the invitation here and for putting me on a panel with such distinguished other panelists. I'm going to count on them to give you a lot of the history I can't touch on, but I do want to raise a couple of points regarding the current situation. And these are taken from the statement on the Gaza-Israel war issued by my organization, the Minaret Freedom Institute. Plug. Go to minaret.org and get yourself educated, not only on this issue, but on a lot of other issues having to do with the intersection of Islam and questions of freedom. Point number one, Hamas violated both international and Islamic law by including non-combatants, women and children in its targets. Now, I know some people don't like this being said, but if we're going to be honest, we have to say it. And therefore, strictly speaking, they did commit acts of terrorism. Now, does that make them a terrorist organization? I will only say this. If it does, then Israel's far more numerous and egregious acts of terrorism make Israel a terrorist state. So I would only ask for those who say that Hamas is a terrorist organization to please be consistent. Israel is a terrorist state by your definition. Now, the next point is that the attack of Hamas, even though it's to be criticized on the grounds I just criticized it, but it should not be called unprovoked. That is an absurdity. The entire history of Israel's incursions into, siege of, and attacks upon Gaza, as well as the soldier-settler violence in the rest of Palestine, shows all too clearly that Hamas's attack was not unprovoked. And even its name, the Aqsa Flood, shows that they were in part, at least motivated, by the persecution of the worshippers at the Al-Aqsa Mosque. 3, this is the most controversial thing I'm going to say today, but it's true. The refrain that Israel has a right to defend itself obfuscates the fact that under international law, it is the occupied and not the occupier who has the right to self-defense. Neither the occupier nor the occupied has a right to attack unarmed civilians, hospitals, churches, synagogues, and mosques, but the occupied has a right to armed resistance that adheres to the international laws of war, and retaliation is not self-defense. What Israel is doing in Gaza is not defending Israelis. Have they defended any Israelis? Last I heard, they killed 3 of the hostages. No, it's meant as retaliation. It's meant to level the area, and that means kill everybody on it, even the Jews who are hostages. 4, this is not a religious conflict. I've already talked about that. 5, media reports are unreliable. This may be the most obvious thing I'm going to say here. But I will quote Malcolm X, who warned us, "If you're not careful, the newspapers will have you hating the people who are oppressed and loving the people who are doing the oppressing." I have 5 minutes. I'll try to make it. The next point is we must all of us, whether you're anti-Zionist or Zionist or Republican or Democrat or whatever, we must all condemn dehumanization. There's overt dehumanization, such as the Israeli leaders calling the Palestinian animals, but there's also dehumanization by omission. This takes many forms, from mentioning war crimes by Hamas while omitting war crimes by Israel, and even some who make a show of balance by, say, expressing concern over the carnage in Gaza, engage in the dehumanization of the Palestinians by failing to include Palestinian voices in the conversation, or by categorically condemning Hamas's excesses as willful brutality while minimizing Israeli brutality as humanitarian cost. It is true, next point, it is true that Hamas does not represent all Palestinians, but it is a perversion of history to say that Hamas seized Gaza in 2007. Of all the things that annoy me, the blatant historical falsehood of this is ridiculous. Hamas won the election in 2006. A coup was then fomented against them. The coup failed in Gaza but was successful in the West Bank and set up the Palestinian Authority as we know it today. And it's not particularly loved. I'll refer you to the newspaper articles. But so this is just a question of fact. So you don't have to like Hamas, but accept the fact, if you believe in democracy, accept the fact that they won the election. Like, you don't have to like Trump, but he won in 2016, and you don't have to like Biden, but he won in 2020. Accept the fact that you lost the election and move on. All right. Now, because of the shortage of time, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on what you can do about it, but I think I may be given a second chance later. I will, however, say this, that what is necessary next is not to foist the PA on Gaza, not to foist Israeli rule on Gaza, not to foist whoever on Gaza. What needs to happen is elections. We need to have elections. And we have to accept that whoever wins the election should be allowed to take office. So, and final point, although it's true that new elections are long overdue, I said Hamas won in 2006. That was a long time ago. But it was not Hamas that refused to have the elections. It was the Palestinian Authority on the pretext that Israel was doing what it's doing at Al-Aqsa, which brings us right back again to the provocations. All right, I hope this has been useful to you. I hope you'll carry it with you. I hope you'll go to Minaret.org and other sources to get more information so that you can become the voice of the voiceless. Although I must say, I believe firmly in what was said earlier, the Gazans are the inspiration to us. We don't need to inspire them. And it's not just because of recent events. I remember demonstrations decades ago. Gaza will resist. Gaza smashed the iron fist. We couldn't resist the way Gaza does. So may God bless them and strengthen them, and may He strengthen all of you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much. That was beautiful. Salam Alaikum again. You know, one of my favorite, and actually, if you really think that you could defeat the Gazans, ask me. I'm married to one. There's no way. It's hopeless. You just say, yes, dear, and you just move on. Just a quick logistics issue. There are volunteers, and they are collecting your questions so that at least, we can have a little bit. I've already received about 5 questions, mashallah. You guys are very active, and you're eager to. I know you have a lot of questions. Some of them may be answered, actually, with our panelists. But there will be volunteers passing with cards like this and pens. So please put your questions, then raise your hand. They'll come, and they will give it to us. We're going to be holding the questions at the very end of the session. And then each person is going to be given 15 minutes. And I am, what are you trying to find?
Water.
Oh, your water. Can you please send some to Gaza too? So then 15 minutes, and at the end we will get the panelists on the stage, and then we will answer all of your questions. We wanted to emphasize that this conflict is not a religious conflict, and nothing actually signifies that more than our panelists today. And as I basically introduce them, you will see for yourself. What most people may not actually understand or know is the fact that the first, what do you need? My voice is really loud. I feel like that the first Jewish settlement, does anybody know when was the first Jewish settlement in Palestine as a settlement? When was it established? What? 48? No. Jazakumullah khair.
One more.
So there are many, but the first that was actually is 1882. 1882, when the Ottomans actually asked persecuted European Jews to come and say, hey, we can give you this land, why don't you establish it? That shows you this is not a religious conflict. The second thing is, this is not a Jewish-Muslim conflict. We actually do a great disservice to a lot of our Christian brothers who also are part of the land. Till today, there are actually Jewish Palestinians in the land of Palestine. At least 10%, at the time of the 1948, at least 10% of the Palestinians were actually Christian Palestinians. What people may not know is that you may be celebrating that little kid that was born in Bethlehem, and that little kid is every Palestinian who's being bombed these days. And what we don't realize is we have this dissonance of like, oh, I'm going to celebrate the birth of this miraculous birth, which Muslims actually believe in, from the Virgin Mary. But I have no problem whatsoever celebrating life coming, but I can turn a blind eye on all of these kids getting killed. So with that, I actually want to read a quote by a Muslim, and he is Reverend Dr. Mundir Ishaq Isaac. Dr. Mundir, he's a reverend, he's a Christian reverend, and he says, the irony for us, Palestinian Christians, is that evangelicals, with their overemphasis on prophecy, have lost the capacity of being prophetic. Their overemphasis on the prophecy have lost the capacity of being prophetic. You want to prove that the Bible is right? You don't do this by pointing to self-fulfilling prophecy or by pointing to world events as a prophecy fulfillment. This is not how you prove that the Bible is right. We prove that the Bible is right by radical obedience to the teachings of Jesus, by proving that Jesus' teachings actually work and that they can make the world a better place. Let us love our enemies, forgive those who sin against us. Let us feed the poor, care for the oppressed, walk the extra mile, be inclusive, not exclusive, turn the other cheek, and maybe, and only maybe then, the world will start to take us seriously and believing in our Bible. What we do see today is the number of Zionist Christians outnumber the number of Zionist Jews. And a lot of our Christian brothers and sisters, again, in trying to fulfill a prophecy, have lost their way from the prophetic. For that, we have Dr. Farah, who is a Palestinian Christian, who has lived in the US since he was 27 years old. He has a Ph.D. in environmental economics. He's retired from the US Government Accountability Office, and your job is to hold us accountable. And Dr. Philip is a founding member of the Palestinian Christian Alliance for Peace. And may we one day find peace in the land of peace. That was established in 2012, and he has addressed audiences across the US on Middle East peace and justice issues. Without further ado, Dr. Philip, please come and join us. Please give him a hand.
Yeah, I prefer this way so I can see my...
And if you want me to do your PowerPoint to
yeah, it's
slides?
okay.
What do you want to do?
Oh, can somebody...
I can advance.
Yeah, okay, shukran. Is this on?
Yes. You can start.
Salam Alaikum. Thank you, Dr. Daoud, Dr. Ashraf, my very good friend Sayyid Sabir, who I think initiated this, if I'm not mistaken, and sisters Tasnuva and Aisha. Thank you all for coming. It's really heartwarming to see so many people. Yeah. Okay, I'm a Palestinian from Jerusalem. I was born 4 years after Dr. Ahmad, and I was born on land. But my family, so 52, after my family were ethnically cleansed from what became West Jerusalem, from the Musrara neighborhood. But three of my grandparents are Ghazawi. The Farah family, the Jahshan family are large, well, had a very large presence in Gaza. Now, unfortunately, the percentage of the Palestinian Christian community in Gaza is tiny. And they are all sheltering, most of them are sheltering in two churches. I will show some photos of these churches. In fact, one of my grand uncles donated in 1905 the building and the land that later became Al-Ahli Hospital. Some of you may remember that 500 people, Muslims and Christians, mostly Muslims, were killed in the grounds of Al-Ahli Hospital after a bombing that Israel claimed was was an errant jihad rocket. But as I'll show later, this was one of the many, many lies that you hear from Israel. 500 people were killed there. The chapel of the saint after which I am named, St. Philip's Chapel at the Ahli Hospital, was a refuge for the most vulnerable of these refugees, and it was damaged badly in that bombing. The other place oh, am I operating this?
Why don't you have a seat there, and then I'll...
I'm sorry?
You can have a seat there.
Okay, no, I don't want to have a seat, right. Yeah. So the other place that was bombed was St. Porphyrius. This is the St. Philip's Chapel. Next, please. So the other place that has a very strong connection to my family was St. Porphyrius Church in the Zaytun neighborhood of Gaza, which is now practically leveled. It has been flattened, and that's okay. If it's a problem, I don't need it.
You're doing fine.
Yeah, this is St. Porphyrius, one of the oldest churches in the world, or the original building. And this is the church around which my family and many of the Christians used to live. That was bombed, and Israel said it was a mistake. This time they did not lie about a jihad bomb or a Hamas rocket. They said, oh, it was a mistake. And many people were killed, including 18 Christians, and 4 of them were my relatives from the Tarazi family and others. One of them survived the bombing from his house. He walked out of the rubble. Like the other Christians, he took refuge in the grounds of St. Porphyrius, and he did not survive that bombing. This is the house of my mother's family, from which they were ethnically cleansed in 1948. I grew up just a couple of blocks from that building. This is my cousin right there. And next, please. So, I grew up in Jerusalem. At the age of 27, I was arrested, placed under administrative detention. Administrative detention, as some of you know, is where you don't even know what the charge against you is. It was used by the British in all of their colonies. And in fact, it was even used against Jews in Palestine. But then, at the time, the Zionists complained that even in Nazi Germany, there were no such laws. And then it was the Minister of Justice who made that statement before Israel became a country, a state. And then he was responsible for continuing that practice against the Palestinians. And tens of thousands of Palestinians, almost every family in Palestine has had somebody in prison, and many were prisoners under this administrative detention. We, of course, all of us who have had that fate were tortured and abused. And that is the only democracy in the Middle East, so-called. I did want to read some of the quotations on the Israel, by necessity, had to do ethnic cleansing because you cannot become a Jewish state when the majority of the population is Jewish. Even in the part that was given to the United States, to Israel by the United Nations in 1947, even there the Jews would have been a slight minority had it not been for the ethnic cleansing of 700,000 Palestinians. Now, a prominent Israeli historian by the name of Benny Morris was interviewed in an Israeli newspaper, and he talked about how it was necessary that there should be this ethnic cleansing, otherwise there wouldn't be a Jew. By the way, Benny Morris considered himself a leftist. And then he said, it is such a shame that Begin did not finish the job, because this place, and this I remember from the quotation, would have been a much quieter place had he completed the job and ethnically cleansed all the Palestinians. You cannot have a majority Jewish state when the majority of the people are Palestinian and have them be agreeable to you. So of course this did not start on October 17th. It started way before even 1948 when the ethnic cleansing was going on. Massacres all over Palestine. My family fled from West Jerusalem after the news of the Deir Yassine massacre. I wanted to show some of the photographs of the killing, but you know, and the policy continues. You know, under the current government, the fascist government of Israel, you have the Minister of Finance, Bezalel Smotrich, saying that we will fill the West Bank with settlements, and the Palestinians have have three options. Either they accept and submit, or they will leave, they'll leave the country, or they will die. This is a direct quote from Minister of Finance of Israel, and he is the minister of the country that we consider our ally, not officially an ally, by the way. Israel does not have an alliance relationship with the United States, but it is effectively one of its strongest allies. And this is the country that we have been supporting. What is happening now, you cannot have submission. There is no situation in history of mankind where people accepted submission and accepted oppression. That was not the case in India. That was not the case in Algeria. It was not the case in South Africa, and it is not the case in Palestine. So submission is not an option. It's either ethnic cleansing or death. They will resist. They will resist either in peaceful ways, nonviolent resistance, or they will resist with violent ways if all the avenues of nonviolent resistance are closed before them. So this is what is happening, because they are not submitting, because the people of Gaza are not submitting, they are guilty, they are responsible for what Israel is doing. This is the logic. This is the logic of the Israelis. Yeah, this is the church of Saint Porphyrius, the 18 bodies of the Palestinian Christians who were killed. Next, please. This is, okay, so yesterday, the other church in Gaza, where the Palestinian Christians were taking shelter, the Church of the Holy Family, there were two women killed. They were one elderly lady by the name of Nahida Anton, was moving from one building in the compound to another, and an Israeli sniper killed her, shot her dead. A sniper inside the compound of the church. Her daughter comes to arrest her, to help her, and she gets shot and killed by the same sniper. And 7 others were injured, badly injured. This is a relative, Ilham Farah, same last name as mine. I didn't know her, but she's from my family. 84-year-old. This is earlier, about maybe 4 weeks ago. She's an obstinate, hard-headed woman, wonderful music teacher, has generations of students whom she taught music and who remember her fondly, many in the US. She said, I am going out to check on my home from the same church, the Church of the Holy Family. A sniper shot her in the foot, and nobody could reach her because they were afraid that they would be shot too. She bled to death, a very painful death. So submission is not an option. And, you know, we who have been active on Palestinian issues have always confronted the question, you know, is Palestine similar to South Africa? You know, both are apartheid regimes. We were very careful at first, you know, to not offend our Jewish brothers and sisters by comparing it to South Africa. But did the South African apartheid regime use bombs against Soweto? Did they bomb them from the air? Did they impose genocidal sieges, preventing water from reaching them, preventing electricity, preventing food from reaching? Isn't that genocidal? Even in South Africa, you did not have that. And in South Africa, fortunately, and in India, it was the non-violent path to resistance that saved the day. But in other places where nonviolent resistance was suppressed and was not supported by people around the world, you had much more violent situations, bloodier paths towards independence, like in Algeria, where there was a far bloodier fight for independence. That is why it is so important for you to speak up. The US, Americans in the United States have a key role in ending this conflict in a way that is not bloody. If we go to speak at Christian churches and we are told by the pastors, we really don't want to offend the synagogue next door, you know. Well, you know, is what Israel doing in Gaza, is that going to help the Jews in Israel live a sustainable future of peace with their neighbors? If your friend is driving drunk, the thing that you ought to do is to take away the keys. That's what we tell them. And that is why it is so important here for your role. Why your role is so important. the more we support the non-violent resistance of the Palestinian people, the more we support BDS, the more we support, talk to your congressman. I have some cards here to send to Biden. The more you speak out, it is making a difference. Now the administration, Genocide Joe, I have no qualms about calling him that name, is hearing what people are doing in the streets, what American Jews are doing, young people. We are not alone. We are not alone. Do not think Islamophobia is very strong in this country, but we are not alone. Do not be afraid, because the only way we can save the situation, the only way for Palestinians and Jews to live in peace in the future is for us to support the nonviolent resistance of the Palestinian people. The other option is not submission. So that's why it's so important for us to speak out. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Farah, and apologies about that technical difficulties. One of the things that I want to emphasize is I think we were all wanting Gaza and Palestine to be liberated, but Palestine and Gaza, I think the people who need liberation is us. We need liberation of our thoughts. We need liberations of our mind. We need liberation from ourselves. We need liberations from our own comfort. And we need liberation from our own intimidation, because we're like, oh, I don't want to offend somebody. I think, offending somebody with your voice is a lot, probably sometimes more benign than offending them with your bombs that are raining down on them. And in order for us to really be of advocacy for those who are oppressed, we ourselves have to be free. And if we have fears, I've always taught my kids, and everywhere I talk, the greatest weapon in the hand of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. And that is why we see a cruel occupation bombing the people of Gaza, but you see that their minds are free. You see that their spirits are high. Regardless that they are being crushed physically, but they have managed to elevate all of our spirits through their resilience. Why? Because they are people who are free. We are comfortable in this country. We're comfortable, but we are not free. We're not free to think what we want. We may think that we are, but we're not, and we're not free to say what we want. And I think people are shaking their heads saying, yeah, I kind of agree with you. With that, I want to introduce one of the fiercest and free people that I know, who always challenges me and certainly bosses me around. That is our esteemed speaker, Laila El-Haddad. She's a Palestinian writer and journalist and a leading voice on Gaza and Palestine, mainly food politics, intersections, maternity, and issues of what it means to be human, to live under occupation. Her first book actually was Gaza Mom, Palestine politics and everything in between. What does it mean to just want to lead a normal life, yet being suffocated from the outside? She's the co-author of The Gaza Kitchen, a Palestinian culinary journey, and covered pivotal events as the Gaza correspondent for Al Jazeera, English between 2003 and 2007. Her groundbreaking appearance on CNN's Parts Unknown with the late Anthony Bourdain was pivotal in starting to showcase Gaza in a humane and a human light. A graduate of Duke University and the Harvard Kennedy School with a focus on political science, public policy, and history, Laila El-Haddad makes her home in Clarksville with her husband, yours truly, who's less known, and her 4 children. Without further ado, Laila is going to share some of her stories and some of her first-hand account with us from the voices of the people of Gaza. So, Laila. I think she's the last. Does Leah have slides? Or no, she doesn't. Yeah, so we're done. Oh, Laila. Let me just, can you click that?
Do I need to? Okay. Okay, so I have a lot to get through in a very short amount of time. Oh, do you have the, can I have it up here? Or? Yeah. So Gaza is where I call home. It's the birthplace of my parents. It's where they grew up, where they studied, where they got married. It's the place of my childhood memories, including my grandfather's farm, which was razed to the ground in the year 2000 and was again the site of an Israeli attack just yesterday. It's where I started my first job as a journalist, as Yassine mentioned, where I raised my young son for the first few years of his life. It has a lot of memories, and it's the place where all of my extended family still resides. But it's also the place with which I think a lot of us think we are familiar, right? And for all the wrong reasons. It usually elicits images of suffering and despair, and certainly that's part of the story, but it also, I think, does a great disservice to Gaza itself. And I'm just going to spend a few slides talking a little bit about Gaza, you know, in antiquity, and then I'm going to bring us up to speed to the current day. So I sometimes say, where do we begin when we speak about Gaza? Do we begin in antiquity? Do we talk about Gaza as the place that has weathered the rule of everyone from the Egyptians to the Persians to the Byzantines, Alexander the Great, Napoleon? Everyone has sought to conquer Gaza as a gateway to conquering Palestine and eventually Bilad al-Sham, the Levant, ultimately to see it rise again and again and again. This is the reality. Or do we speak about Gaza as the place that was once a crossroads between civilizations, a nexus between continents? Gaza, who has a storied history as a prosperous city along the Mediterranean, a thriving and bustling hub along all of the major and historic trade and spice routes, famous for its barley, its hospitality, and its innovation. Maybe we talk about Gaza as the namesake of Gaz. How many people in the audience know this by a show of hands, by the way? Yeah, well, more than I talked to, right? The open weave fabric, of course, with which we are all familiar, made of cotton and sometimes silk, used to dress wounds. An irony, of course, that is not lost on all of the residents there. Maybe we speak of Gaza as the resting place of Hashim ibn Abdul Manaf, the great-grandfather of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where he died during one of his many trade journeys. Perhaps we talk about it as the birthplace of Shafi'i, Imam al-Shafi'i, who famously talked about Gaza and said, وَإِنِّي لَمُشْتَاقٌ إِلَىٰ أَرْضِ غَزَّةٍ وَإِنْ خَانَنِي بَعْدَ التَّفَرُّقِ كِتْمَانِي سَقَى اللَّهُ أَرْضًا لَوْ ظَفِرْتُ بِتُرْبِهَا كَحَلْتُ بِهِ مِنْ شِدَّةِ الشَّوْقِ أَجْفَانِي. I long for the land of Gaza, he said. Through my silence, though my silence betrays me after a long separation, Allah has blessed this land such that if I were to run my fingers through its earth, I would use it to adorn my eyes as I would kuhul. This is Imam al-Shafi'i. His birthplace was Gaza. So again, just some of the things that Gaza is known for. This is Gaza in the 1920s, I want to say. This is the main street in Gaza where I'm from, actually. That was completely leveled to the ground in recent weeks. Now, Gaza as we know it today, we know it as Qita Gaza, the Gaza Strip. But it was actually, prior to that, known as Mantiqat Liwa Gaza, Qada Gaza, the Gaza District, one of many Palestinian administrative districts under the British Mandate that encompassed this much larger area you see here, which we've also heard referred to as the Gaza envelope. And this is significant for reasons that will become apparent. So Palestinians were living all over, of course, until the Nakba happened. The ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians that Dr. Philip referred to earlier, and our other speakers as well, a deliberate campaign that sought to drive Palestinians from their homes, including my husband's family up north. Now, the Palestinians that were living in this area around Gaza ended up going to the closest sort of urban area to them, which was, of course, Gaza City, and the borders were drawn around them, and they were prevented from returning to their homes. This created a situation that saw Gaza's population triple overnight, and this is why you hear Gaza being referred, oh my God, 10 minutes, being referred to as 80% refugees and descendants of refugees. You might have heard this in the news over and over again. I know, I heard you, but I don't know if I can do it in 10 minutes. So. Okay. Just briefly, because we didn't touch much on the rest of Palestine, just as a visual, it's very difficult sometimes when I'm having conversations with people, even those in our communities, for them to understand or to convey the fact that I mean, what do you notice about this map? Maybe I'll just make this a little interactive. Someone wants to raise their hand. Just one thing. What do you notice about this map? And the areas in yellow, by the way, are the ones that Palestinians have administrative control over internally, but no areas are sovereign. But what do you notice? Someone raise their hand quickly and, okay. It's fading. What else? What do you notice about the... Yes, the completely non-contiguous, otherwise known as Swiss cheese, was famously described as a situation of Swiss cheese. And in fact, the areas that Palestinians resided and control in the West Bank are less than, I want to say 90% of the land is directly controlled by Israel. Areas otherwise known as Area C, otherwise known as areas where settlements exist, or areas that Palestinians simply can't access or can't develop. This is very important and significant. Israel has created a situation where Palestinians are confined to cantons or Bantustans or ghettos, Gaza being the largest of those. And very significantly, the West Bank is completely cut off from where? From Gaza, right? Okay, so just keep that in mind. Israel does this through a systematic oppression of the Palestinians, in which, again, it controls the populations within the West Bank, within East Jerusalem, and within Gaza, with an ID card system called a Hawiyya. So if you have a Hawiyya that's a Gaza Hawiyya, you can only use that to enter and leave Gaza. You cannot use that to enter the West Bank, and vice versa. If you have one from East Jerusalem, you need an approved military Israeli permit to travel, which is very hard to obtain. For a separate talk, but just keep that in mind, because this isn't just about Gaza, right? It's about this overriding Israeli system of oppression that I talked about, an apartheid system that aims to maximize control over the land while minimizing the people, the Palestinians that live in that land. Israel is by definition an ethno-majority supremacy, and Zionism is inherently anti-Palestinian because it defines itself as being able to, as a state that is exclusively for the Jewish people. Okay, to Gaza, in the very few minutes that I have left. Gaza, the Gaza Strip itself, is roughly the same size as the Baltimore metro area with twice the population. Okay, Gaza, as we know it today, is the most closed off area on earth, the most surveilled area on earth. All the borders are controlled by Israel. There's a maritime blockade, there's an aerial blockade, there's a land blockade. So it's no exaggeration to say that everything about your life is controlled by Israel. I'm going to show this. I apologize to my daughter who has seen this about 100 times, but it does a very good job of explaining. Oh, shoot. Oh, my God. It's okay. It's okay. It's okay. Take care of it. Just spilled tea everywhere. It's fine. I don't need this. Just leave it here. It's okay. Print them again. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Oh, there's two. Give it for the laptop. I know. I know, I'm going to say. So it's like 11 years ago. So this video was created by Gisha, which is the Legal Center for Freedom of Movement. It's an Israeli nonprofit that focuses exclusively on Gaza and the blockade. And it was actually made 11 years ago, if you can believe it. And that's because Gaza has been under a long-standing Israeli blockade for more than 16 years. Again, understanding Gaza is to understand the rest of the Palestinian struggle. So you have to think of it as a laboratory, a kind of focal point for understanding the way that Israeli policies work vis-a-vis Palestinians. So as you're watching the news, as you continue to hear about Gaza, remember that this has to do, first and foremost, about Palestinian rights and freedom from occupation, from a system of violent Israeli apartheid that I talked about. This formula of maximizing control over the land with as few Palestinians in that land is integral to the whole idea, to the Israeli project. And it's about control. When we hear about this pattern of mowing the lawn in Gaza, it's really about control over Palestinian land and lives. Gaza has had a long history of repression when it comes to Israel. In 1954, shortly after Israel formally occupied Gaza in 1967, or just before, I should say, they sent in one Ariel Sharon at the time, who would then become the prime minister, in this kill unit called Unit 101 to try to pacify Palestinian Fidaiyin or resistance fighters. Interestingly, one of the co-founders of Hamas many years in the future, Abdelaziz Rantisi, saw his uncle getting killed by Ariel Sharon in 1954. 1956 was a year that's significant to my family because my mother was in Khan Yunis and witnessed this firsthand, but it was what was known as the Suez Crisis or the tripartite aggression. And then again, you have in 1967, and then into the formal occupation, and in the 1970s, Ariel Sharon goes back into Gaza and tries to completely pacify the resistance there in the refugee camps, orders the summary execution of 1,000 Palestinian men, and raises down large tracts of land in the refugee camps. And of course, Gaza is also the birthplace of both the first and the second Palestinian intifadas, leading leaders like Yitzhak Rabin to say that he wished he could wake up one day and find that Gaza has sunk into the sea because it was always such a thorn in their side. Gaza, of course, has a long history of being closed off, of some subject to some form of Israeli closure, not just for the past 16 years, but ever since the implementation of the Oslo Accords in the early 90s. I won't dwell too much on this, but just to say that it's been subject to some form of closure for a very long time. Okay, I wanted to really spend a few minutes talking about this because it's a critical year, and I apologize for the history lesson, but it's really critical to helping you understand how we got to where we are today, because frequently you'll hear in the media, but Israel left Gaza, like what else did they want, right? We removed the settlements and we gave them the state that they wanted. It's critical to understand this was A, unilateral process, B, simply a strategic restructuring of Israel's occupation, in which Israel dismantled the settlements within Gaza, relocated the settlers, and really increased the chokehold they had on Gaza by retaining effective control over all of Gaza's markers of sovereignty and enforcing a very strict blockade. So while they dismantled the settlements, they reinforced their closure of Gaza, and they began to operate remotely, their occupation remotely from around Gaza's perimeter. And of course, Palestinians had no sovereignty whatsoever. And the person who designed the disengagement, Daoud Weissglass, said of it that it was actually formaldehyde so that the political process can indefinitely be frozen with the Palestinians and nothing else. That's what it was intending to accomplish. And it was again, sort of a strategic way to be able to contain and control Gaza from afar. On the heels of that come the Palestinian elections. Our previous speaker talked about this, so I won't spend too much time on this, but these were years I was living and reporting in Gaza, so I remember them well. In a surprise victory, of course, Hamas comes to power. The CIA, doing what it does best, decides to get involved. It's a huge catastrophe, as it has been historically and many other. This is a great article talking about this if you're interested in learning more. They try to get involved and they funnel in tens of millions of dollars in arms to one of the rivals known as Imad-ad-Dean to try to sow chaos within Gaza and a coup against the elected political party of Hamas, which did not work. So since that didn't work, they decide instead, hand in hand with Israel, to enforce a full-out blockade on Gaza, and that's what we continue to see in place today. The aims of this blockade were to continue to separate Gaza from the West Bank and East Jerusalem, to fragment the Palestinian population, and really to continue to de-develop Gaza. This is very important. Again, the same person, Daoud Weissglass, in an interview in Haaretz, said of the blockade, the idea was to put Palestinians on a diet, but not make them die of hunger. And we still see this notion of the weaponization of food in existence till today. So in other words, continuously keeping Gaza on the brink of collapse with an intravenous drip of relief, right? So this is from a leaked embassy memo in which the Israelis told the Americans, we will always just keep Gaza on collapse while not totally pushing it over the edge. And this has been the reality for 2.3 million Palestinians in Gaza for 16 years. who, again, high unemployment rates, are unlikely to have a job or be able to visit family without an Israeli military permit, to be able to trade, to fish more than 9 nautical miles into sea, or to farm in the agricultural areas that are near the border. An average 16-year-old in Gaza would have endured, by today, 6 different assaults in their lifetimes. And people now are saying they're measuring age by the number of wars they have endured. I'm just going to end by bringing us up to speed, of course, on the latest figures. This is as of this morning. I guess I might reserve some time for question and answer. I did want to spend, and it is a situation that we have never seen this many journalists and this many, again, we hear a lot about this being a war of self-defense or a war on Hamas, but the figures tell a completely different story. The overwhelming majority of those who have been killed have been women and children. The overwhelming percentage of what has been targeted has been civilian infrastructure. So this is important to keep in mind. This is a war that intends, in the words of Israeli officials themselves, to make Gaza unlivable. And as I like to call it, endgame Sinai. This is also a war that has used dehumanizing rhetoric to try to justify the assault. These are all just screenshots of different things that Israeli leaders have said, pitching this as a war between light and dark, as a war being waged against human animals, so the unhumans to which the laws of war do not apply. And again, this is consistent with the way that Israeli leaders have talked about Palestinians over the years. It's nothing new. It's just much more sort of brazen this time around. Just ending with a couple of slides talking about what's happening right now. Many of you might have heard about this new acronym because of the hundreds of families that have been, extended families with 50 members or more, that have been completely killed off from the population registry by Israel, leaving orphans with not a single surviving member of their family. So this is an acronym created by the medical community unique to Gaza. It is also targeted, Israel has destroyed 22% of all farmland in Gaza to date. Not to mention, of course, I talked about weaponizing food, but also water. And I'm just ending with a couple of pictures of some of the victims. This was Shaymat Saidam, who was top in her class in all of Palestine, who was killed. These are all members of my family, my mother's side of the family, who were killed. This was my aunt, who was killed in her home in Gaza City. And I really like to end with this, poem, or not poem, excuse me, quote by poet and novelist Hiba Abu Nada, and she was killed just a few days after writing this. The city is dark except for the glow of missiles, quiet except for the sound of bombs, terrifying except for the comfort of prayer, black except for the light of those who have been killed. Good night, Gaza. Do I have time to go to the last slide, or no? Am I reading good? Okay. I also wanted to end on a hopeful note. Gaza, it has, is a hub of innovation. It's historically been known as a place of resilience and not by sort of choice, I guess, but by necessity. This is after the last 2014 assault, just some different pictures of people that I have had a chance to meet and write about, and the ways they've rebuilt. They've come back from the ashes and helped Gaza rebuild. And a farmer that I met, and I always think about him when we talk about what we can do. We have no choice but to do, considering that we here are uniquely positioned in a unique position in which our tax dollars are is what's doing this, right? This is a farmer whose olive grove was razed to the ground 3 separate times over. And when I asked him what he was doing, he said he was replanting it for the 3rd time because he had no choice. If this was his way of resisting. So when we talk about resistance, it comes in all shapes and forms. And he said, if I don't do this, then I've given up, right? And I don't have that luxury. In terms of what you can do, I think we're going to hear more about that in the coming presentation. But, sorry, have you seen my phone? I just want to read one thing. But just quickly, I always just like to say, educate, visit, amplify, advocate. Just the other day, just on almost spur of the moment, a few of us in our community decided we wanted to create a binder with sort of a photo story and go and deliver it to 15 Democratic senators. We didn't call the office ahead of time. We worked on it together. A few days, we had it printed and ready. And we went I think it started off with 2 and it ended up being about 15 of us. And we just went door to door and insisted to speak to the staffers and talk to them a little bit and gave them the binders. And that's a very small action that you could even do on a weekly basis, anyone. And you could just call up a couple of friends. This is your right, and they need to listen to you. They're your elected representatives. We sometimes in our communities get excited if a senator or a staffer decides to come visit us. We're like giddy. That's their responsibility. You know, you need to hold them accountable. You don't just do photo ops for them and think that that's the end of the day and get excited if they visit your mosque, right? Hold them accountable. Visit them. Go lobby your representatives. Join advocacy days, or just go by yourself with someone who knows. These are some great resources that I always like to recommend if you want to learn more. And if you're on social media, then amplify Palestinian voices on the ground. And with that, I'm going to, I guess, hand it over to my next speaker. I did want to, sorry, one quote. Yassine talked about Gaza liberate, not needing us. And it reminded me of this Mahmoud Darwish quote from a poem called Silence for Gaza, where he says, Gaza does not liberate us. Gaza has no horses, airplanes, magic wands, or offices in capital cities. Gaza liberates itself from our attributes and liberates our language from its Gazas at the same time. So with that,
and now you know that I was not exaggerating when I was saying she is my more eloquent half. Thank you, Leila, for that very powerful testimony, and thank you for educating us on the issues of Gaza, and thank you for enlightening us. And somebody said, can I not work for issues of justice and advocacy? And the truth of the matter is we cannot afford not to, because an injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And it is a threat to your own humanity. You could go to sleep, you could listen to what we talked about, you could actually say, I know a little bit, maybe this challenges your views before you came in, maybe you hold a different opposing view, and that is okay. It's not, but at least I just hope that when you go home, you don't just go to sleep very comfortable. I don't mean discomfort for you, but I mean that at least this is challenging my views, and this is going to force me to think twice. And if it does, what does it dictate for me and my own humanity? In the Quran, we have, by the way, for those who are not Muslim, and even for those who are Muslim, there's a hadith, a saying of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and he says, كَادَ الْقُرْآنُ أَنْ يَكُونَ مُوسَى, that the Holy Quran is just about, the whole Holy Quran is about Musa. So if you actually look, the most commonly mentioned name in the whole Quran is Moses. The biggest stories, the biggest lessons are about Moses. And the story of the birth of Musa and how, and how he challenged is actually, it's called Surah Al-Qasas. Al-Qasas meaning the stories. And it starts with the Pharaoh and how he was and how he wanted to be belligerent and bullying, and God brought Moses, to take care of the Pharaoh. In the very beginning of that chapter, in verse 17, Moses says something that is very powerful, and he says, قَالَ رَبِّي بِمَا أَنْعَمْتَ عَلَيَّ فَلَنْ أَكُونَ ظَهِيرًا لِلْمُجْرِمِينَ. He says, my Lord, for the favor you bestowed upon me, I will never be an assistant to the criminals. For the favors that you have given me, for the power that you have given me, for the enlightenment you have given me, I shall never be an assistant to the criminals, to the oppressors. It would be, another quote, it would be my greatest sadness to see, this is not by Moses or the Quran or Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It would be my greatest sadness to see Zionists, he referred to them at that time, it was interchangeable, do to Palestinian Arabs much of what Nazis did to Jews. That is none but Albert Einstein, who himself was Jewish, and they were trying very hard to recruit him to the Zionist movement, and even they offered him a lot of things in Palestine, including official records, including becoming a president, and he refused because he had the humanity and the Jewish tradition within him that made him refuse. And he's saying, I never want to see what happened to us in Europe that we do to the Arabs. With that, we have our own Einstein amongst us. Leah Harris is an independent journalist, writer, and Ashkenazi Jewish American advocate for Palestinian freedom. In 2003, Leah co-led an interfaith peace builders delegation to Gaza and the occupied territories, and now collaborates with organizations including If Not Now, Jewish Voice for Peace, and the Virginia Coalition for Human Rights. It really warms our heart that we are seeing our Jewish brothers and sisters actually taking center stage, and mainstream in opposing the oppressive and cruel practices that are being brought against the Palestinian people. With that, Leah, please come forward and please give her a hand.
Salam Alaikum, everybody. So, trying to clip this, sorry. My sweater's a little thick. Good. All right, I'm just gonna hold it, maybe that'll work, okay. I'm so grateful to be here with all of you today, to see this incredible crowd. I was sitting in the front, so I did not see how many people were here. And I just want to say how grateful I am to MCC for having us, and very, very grateful to be following this really esteemed panel of speakers. All right, I'm just gonna keep an eye on the time here. So yeah, I really appreciate that point that Dr. Yassine mentioned, all of his points, but in the introduction, when he talked about the anti-Zionist Jewish tradition. And as someone who's Generation X, I'm like, hey, this didn't start with young people right now. As long as there has been Zionism, there has been a tradition of anti-Zionism. And I think that's something that, knowing I'm part of that tradition, keeps me moving forward, knowing I'm carrying on that honorable tradition. So I'm just going to first start off sharing a little bit of my own story and how I came to be a part of the Palestine Solidarity Movement. The beginning of my story is very typical. I was raised in an Ashkenazi Jewish, Eastern European family. Our family fled from Poland and Ukraine from anti-Semitic violence in the early part of the 20th century. I come from a proud labor tradition, which has also a lot of connections with anti-Zionism too. And I went to Hebrew school. In my Jewish education, we learned the prayers over bread, wine, the candles, and alongside that, we learned the national anthem of Israel. So that was an intrinsic part of my Jewish education, woven into the fabric of everything that I learned. And I was raised on lies. I was told that the land of Palestine, of course they didn't use that word, was a land for a people without a land. I'm sure you've all heard that lie. I was taught that the Jewish Holocaust was unique in history, that there was never anything like it and there never will be again. I was told that we, the Jewish people, have always been hated and we always will be, and the logical conclusion of that is that the state of Israel was the only way to guarantee our survival. So these were the ideas that were drummed into my head in what I really consider brainwashing. And I'm still, to this day, I'm quite angry about the way that so many of my Jewish brothers and sisters have been brainwashed. Also, we learned you can't trust anyone who's not Jewish. That was drilled into us again and again. Fast forward to the first Intifada. I was around 15 years old, and my family was playing the news at the dinner table, and I knew that I was supposed to identify with those guys driving the tanks. Like, I knew that was the team that I was supposed to be on. But instead, I really identified with the young people my age who were throwing stones, who were so courageously meeting those tanks in ways they should never, ever have to. And I knew I couldn't say anything about this. I couldn't speak those ideas because they would be unacceptable in my family, but I remembered that and I held on to that. And my family tried to get me to go on the birthright trip, with, if you all are familiar, it's a rite of passage for Zionist Jewish families, and it's an additional layer of brainwashing, and really the end goal of it is to try to, is to try to get people to become settlers on the land that was stolen by Israel from Palestinians. That's really, the end goal behind that. And we were always taught that that's one of the most holy things you can do as a Jew is to become a settler colonist. And then, so I refused the birthright trip. I was a bit of an anti-authoritarian, and I refused to go on that. And I'm really, really glad that I made that decision as a young person. And then fast forward, I did my junior year abroad in Egypt in 1996. I was living in Cairo. I went to the American University in Cairo. And that was the very first time I met a Palestinian, another student who was studying with me at the AUC. At the same time, I had some Jewish friends, Zionists from the US, who were very, very nervous about me living in Cairo. They were extremely worried about me, which of course is ridiculous. And they were begging me to go to Palestine. And I decided to go, and of course, with the unearned privilege of my American passport, I was able to step foot on land that Palestinians who for generations have lived and loved and tended that land are prohibited from entering. But of course, they just let me walk right in. And I was also exposed to more attempts to brainwash me while I was there. And I rejected all of those. My friends were trying to get me literally to go to like these re-education seminars to convince American Jews to become Zionists. They tried and tried and tried with me. And it was also at that time that I, of course, indirectly experienced the full force of the anti-Arab and anti-Palestinian, anti-Muslim racism that is so inherent within Zionism, right? And that is drilled into the minds of Israelis and American Jews. When I told people I was living in Cairo and I told Israelis, their demeanor towards me completely changed. And they looked at me as if I was mentally unstable. And they said things to me like, I wouldn't live in Cairo if you paid me $1 million. And how does it feel to be surrounded by Arabs? And I really had to shake my head at that question because look at the map, right? But that's the mentality, right? That's the mentality. And of course I was disgusted by this. I was disgusted by it. This is the place where I'm supposed to, they were all saying to me, welcome home, welcome home. I'm like, I don't feel at home here whatsoever. And in Egypt, I had started to learn Arabic and really fell in love with the language. And I just ditched all of those people that had invited me there. And I spent all of my time in occupied East Jerusalem and began to make more Palestinian friends who did the incredible emotional labor of educating me and teaching me about their struggle. And it was really at that moment that I became an anti-Zionist, and I never looked back. And I'll just share one other little story, and then I want to talk about advocacy and really, really want to hear all of your thoughts and questions. When I came back to Egypt a second time in 2000, I ended up writing a piece, pretty much, it was an essay in Arabic about basically the experience I told you just now. And my teacher submitted it to Al-Ahram, the Egyptian newspaper, and it was published in Sunduq al-Barid, the post box. It's a column. And later in the year, I just want to kind of share with you a contrast of how I was received in Egypt versus my own, the quote-unquote community. Later in that year, the editor of that column, Ahmad Bagat, selected that column as like the qa'imat al-sharaf, like the honor roll. Like that's the kind of welcome that I received. And then when I came back to the United States and was doing activism and speaking out very vocally as a Jew against U.S. tax-funded aid to Israel, against the occupation and the apartheid, we're in a holy place, so I can't like spell out the name, but you can put the acronym together. I was put on the self-hating Israel threatening list. The S list, I will not spell it out. So it just shows you the contrast, right? In terms of this cult of Zionism, right? And I really do believe that it is a cult. And I would really recommend, there's a piece in Mondoweiss by Abigail Arbonell called Exiting Zionism, and she's a psychotherapist, and she talks about the ways in which Zionism has everything in common with a cult. Obviously, it's a genocidal, thank you, genocidal death cult. But, you know, I mean, and one of those things is, right, those who disagree with the cult are excommunicated, right, cut off from family, from community. Mohammed El-Kurd, who's a Palestinian journalist, he tweeted about the editor of the Jerusalem Post actually issued what he called a fatwa against us when he said that anti-Zionist Jews are no longer a part of the people Israel. And of course, I reject that with all of my heart and soul, right? That he said we should treat them as if they are no longer a part of us and deal with them accordingly or something like that. So very, very dangerous language. My Judaism is at the heart of my solidarity with Palestine. My tradition teaches me, B'Tselem Elohim, that we are all made in the image of God. Tikkun Olam, our duty to repair the world. And Pikuach Nefesh, which is the sacred obligation to save and preserve life. And I'm also guided by the Ashkenazi principle of, it's called Daikite, that's a Yiddish word from my ancestral language that says we make a home wherever we are. We don't need a genocidal Jewish supremacist ethno-state to feel safe, right? As Biden said at his Hanukkah party last week. We find safety in social justice movements, in solidarity with all groups of people who are dreaming and fighting for a different world. And you know, right now, as you all know, the Palestine Solidarity Movement is witnessing unprecedented growth, right? I used to say you have to travel there, and I still believe in the importance of doing that if or whenever that is possible. But nowadays, nobody has to travel there, right? It comes 24/7. Palestine is showing us what is happening there, right? And I think there's no coincidence that with the rise of social media, there's a whole generation of young Jews who've been radicalized, and that's when a new organization, if not now, started. I also work with Jewish Voice for Peace, and we are, you know, collaborating together. You know, we've led close to 100 actions since October 7th, and so much before that, of course. And I won't go into all of them because I don't have time. But I will say that, you know, our Judaism is seamlessly woven into what we do. On the 5th night of Hanukkah, we lit candles in front of the White House to present an alternative vision to Biden's Hanukkah party. And I just really want to let you know that it is called Jewish Voice for Peace, but regardless of your faith, you are incredibly welcome, and we would be honored to have anyone of any faith at our events. And there's this QR code here that tells you all the different ways to get in touch with Jewish Voice for Peace locally, as well as nationally, as well as If Not Now. Laila's already mentioned, you know, several of those resources that I encourage you to check out. The U.S. Campaign for Palestinian Rights has 1 million toolkits. You do not have to do anything from scratch. They've thought through every different kind of actions, whether it's legislative advocacy, media advocacy, tools for organizing actions and events. There's people doing very creative Christmas events right now to raise awareness as to why Christmas is canceled in Bethlehem right now. Organizing at the local level, state level, city council level, getting your union to divest, right? There's so many different directions, pressuring and protesting and engaging in civil disobedience if that's your thing, right? A lot of us have very visibly shut things down, you know, no business as usual, you know, while our tax dollars are funding Israel to perpetrate this horrific genocide in our names. And so I really encourage you to check out these resources to get connected. I also just quickly want to mention there's power hours. So, you know, if you just have a little bit of time in your day, U.S. Campaign for Palestinian Rights hosts power hours. I know AMP has done that as well. And JVP has power hours just about every day, I think. where you can get updated on what's happening in Congress, reach out to your legislators, do it all together, right? When we do this in community, we feel empowered, right? And that's what we need right now. They want to wear the movement down. But I just want to say that I want to quote the Jewish activist Grace Paley by way of closing. And she says, "The only recognizable feature of hope is action." And in these times, I really find hope in action, and with all souls of all faiths who love life and love freedom. And I just want to say to all of you that it is our greatest commitment. I mean, I'll speak for myself, but also as for anti-Zionist Jews, that we will not give up no matter how severe the crisis. We're only growing in numbers, in moral clarity, and in our commitment for a ceasefire. And as everybody said, it's not about us liberating Palestine, but Palestine is liberating all of us. So I will close there. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Sister Leah. Appreciate it. Thank you to all of you for attending today. Thank you to MCC for having us here and for inviting us and for educating us. Thank you to our panelists. I'm going to request the panelists to get to the stage so that we can answer some of the questions. Leah, this is yours. And I got many of your questions, so please forgive me. I'll try to get them in the order they were received, and I'm compiling them. I do have only one bias in regard to the questions, which is if you had bad handwriting, then I may not be able to answer your question. But that's the only bias. Even though I'm a doctor and I have a horrible handwriting, but a couple handwritings, I have to say that I couldn't read all of what you said, so I have to apologize. As Leah taught us, that sympathy without action is a spectatorship. And we refuse to be spectators. So if you really feel about something, if you really believe in something, then that belief has to move you to actions. As a Muslim, al-imanu ma waqara fil qalb wa saddaqahu al-amal. Al-iman, faith, is what settled in your heart and what is shown by your actions. Otherwise, really, there's no meaning to that faith that you carry. So with that, we have a few. I'll have a 3 or 4. By the way, for those of you who have not prayed Asr, Maghrib is still about an hour and some away. So at 4, I'll give you a signal if you want to go pray Asr and then come back if you are interested. So this is to all the panelists. And, okay, that's perfect. And do we have the second? I think one of the speakers has it, or no? No? Okay. Each one of you, I made you guys look like, all of you. So the very first question is, it's a multi-layered question. So please, if I can 3 or 4 different questions, I'm going to put all of them together. One is, why is freedom of speech selective? Students, teachers who speak up pro-Palestinian are targeted. What that is, the second part of it is, how can pro-Palestinians better message that being pro-Palestinian does not mean you are anti-Jewish, and that being anti-Zionist does not mean you are anti-Jewish. In fact, a huge community of pro-Zionists are anti-Jewish. So basically, are you pro-Palestinian and anti-Israel or anti-Zionism, but you are not anti-Jewish? How could you package that message that people are talking about? With that, the third would be, for those in higher education and student activism, so much of the discourse around this genocide has been fraught with concerns of academic freedom and what may be considered wrongly as anti-Semitic incitement in speech. How do we navigate this space? So far you are all following. And then, why in the last 75 years, Arabs and Muslims, but they crossed Muslims out, I think, in US, not adapted or adopted the American system? I'm giving you a really, like, this is bad handwriting, I'm sorry. But I appreciate the question though. The American system, and have remained unknown with something manageable voice in America. Basically, why has the Muslims and Arabs been quiet, and why haven't they talked about the issue of Palestine? And for all of you guys, we do have actually with us, Angela Wolf is here. If you do not know, we are in Montgomery County, and there are 4 Montgomery County public school educators who have been put on administrative leave for just speaking on the issue of Palestine. Just speaking on the issue of Palestine, we do have 4. And Angela Wolf, do you want to identify yourself?
Do you want to identify yourself?
So Ms. Wolf is right in the back. And can we give her a hand of applause for her stance? And really to answer that question, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but to answer that question, we would love for you to give us your perspective and what has happened as part of the answer to this question, if you don't mind coming forward. I don't want to put you on the spot. I'll allow these folks to ask. So Dr. Imad, 75 years, you have been in America. Where has been your voice? I mean, that's the question.
That is the question, and it's a good question. Although in my case, I've been speaking. But I have to tell you something. My parents, but I have to tell you, my parents were unusual. My mother was a college-educated teacher and radio producer and personality in Jerusalem. First woman to ever read news on Jerusalem radio. So she was quick to adapt, and she set the model that I've tried to follow. My father was more typical of the immigrants. You're going to recognize him. In 1967, my mom wrote a letter to the Today Show complaining at their bias that they never presented the Arab point of view. The producers called her up and said, "We can't get anybody to come on the air. Will you come on the air?" My father said no. He was afraid. He was afraid his suppliers in New York would cut him off. We've got to put that behind us. Yes, there will be prices to be paid. People here on this panel will tell you the prices they paid. But it is worth it. And if the Gazans can pay the price, why can't we? A related question that was in the fold about freedom of speech. You know, it is selective now, but it doesn't stay selective. Once freedom of speech is attacked, it gets closed down across the board. It was H.L. Mencken said, if you're going to defend freedom of speech, you got to defend sons of bitches, because they're the first freedom of speech that's going to be attacked. I'm not saying that phrase applies to us, but to the other side, that's how they see us, and that's how they're going to treat us when they treat us as human at all. So you got to do it. You got to stand up. You got to speak. How do you speak? I'm sure the others will go into more detail, but you do write to your congressmen, you do write to your senators. More importantly, you write to the editors of the newspapers. You may think, oh, they'll never publish it, and you're probably right, but they read it, they count it. They know how many people are saying, why aren't you covering this? And it will affect the dialogue.
Anybody else?
Have any immediate thoughts?
Well, one thing that I've said earlier, and it applies here, is that we are not alone. With respect to the freedom of speech, the right wing of this country is, I forget the name of, I think it's some legal outfit that is a very right-wing legal outfit, wants to use the 33 states formula against people who advocate for boycott and divestment, want to use the same formula against people who speak out on the environment, against people who speak out on energy, against fossil fuels, and so the key is to find allies. We do have a lot of allies. You know, amazingly, the United Auto Workers Union, one of the largest in the country, has declared that it is for a ceasefire, and they are studying boycott and divestment. This was unheard of for us, our activist community, only a couple of years ago. And now United Auto Workers, the Postal Workers Union, some electric union, I forget the exact name, electric, mechanical workers. So we are not alone. And find the allies and find ways that you can connect with them, and you won't be alone.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this has been building for a long time. A lot of us have been fighting against the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, which equated anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism, right? And this is because they are losing the public's imagination. And this is all they have left, is to smear and defame people and get them canceled. And I just would echo what Philip said, is that there is strength and power in numbers. And when, for example, Columbia University kicked out Students for Justice in Palestine and JVP, 40 campus organizations signed a letter saying that they were pushing Columbia to divest, right, from apartheid. So I think, yes, people are being targeted in terrifying, disturbing ways, and that is something that also we need to be in solidarity with them. But I really agree that this is, in some ways, it's a red herring, because they're trying to distract us from the genocide, from the apartheid, from the occupation, from the 75 years, by getting us all in this constant debate about, is this not, or is this anti-Semitism? I wish no Palestinian, Arab, or Muslim ever had to talk about anti-Semitism, but that's the position that they put us in.
With regards to the question about how to address that point about anti-Zionism being anti-Semitism, I echo everything that you said, and I would probably say the best argument, first of all, there's a lot written out there about this, so I'll just refer you to Peter Baynard, has an excellent piece about this if you just research him, and he writes specifically, he breaks down this argument like one by one. But I always like to, Peter Baynard, yeah. I always like to say that Palestinians and supporters of Palestinian rights and freedom, the Palestinian cause, are anti-Zionist because Zionism is by definition anti-Palestinian, and Zionism necessitates the ethnic cleansing of Palestine from Palestinians because it defines itself by maintaining a state that is an ethno-majority supremacy. And so that's the best way to counter it. That the criticism is of the way, not of a people's right to live, a Jewish people's right to live, but to live in a state that is exclusively theirs at the expense of another people. Everyone should live freely and together with equal rights. So that's the best way to dismantle that argument. And I'll just add that, as Frederick Douglass said, power concedes nothing without a demand. You're not going to expect results if you just sit there and grumble amongst yourselves. I'll give you a very simple example. Not the biggest one or the most, doesn't make headlines, but in Howard County, they were trying to start walkouts. And my daughter's school was one of the first that proposed this idea to the administration. And they kept getting no for like 2 or 3 weeks. And they met, and the 3 vice principals brought them in multiple times and interrogated the 3 students that wanted to do it, and then made my daughter take off a free Palestine from the river to the seapin, and on and on and on. Ultimately, they were successful in a walkout, a very watered down walkout, and they confiscated a sign that said "End the siege," and they weren't allowed to mention Gaza or Palestine. And so we fought back, and we pushed, and we met with the administration and the superintendent. And what came out of that is that one of the vice principals personally apologized to my daughter about the pin, said that she had no idea that's what was meant by it, because we educated them on that. And so we sometimes assume everyone has sinister intentions, and a lot of people do, but often they just haven't heard from us or from the other perspective. And so you do have to push back on every level, and it's exhausting. But again, this is our obligation. We have to do this, whether it's on the school level, the K-12 level, whether it's on the state government level, when we were in the, speaking with Senator Van Hollen, he said, this is in the very beginning, he said, I haven't seen anyone from your communities in my office is 0, but I'm seeing a lot from the other side. So you might want to convey that message to your communities, that not to ask for meetings, and even if you don't get a meeting, just show up at the office and talk to a staffer. You know, that's something that we all should be doing.
Can I add, I want to make 2 quick anecdotes in support of what was just said. One is to avoid being called an anti-Semite. It's not enough to not say anti-Semitic things and not be an anti-Semite. You gotta avoid saying something that taken out of context will be presented as anti-Semitic. If you do that, then when they try to take what you said out of context anyway, it'll backfire. An African American wrote a letter to the editor of a newspaper in which he said, calling from river to the sea, Palestine will be free, anti-Semitic, and saying it calls for the death of all Jews, is like saying that abolitionists, the one that banned slavery in the United States, wanted the death of all the white people.
And all of that, I agree with what everyone has said. And I apologize that I came in late, so I didn't catch everyone's name. My apologies. But the speaker who said that this is not a religious issue, it's not about religion, right? The fight is not about religion. This is a political issue. And as far as, sorry, I'm not a public speaker. I'm a public school teacher, but I always know what I'm about to say. I'm always well prepared for that. But as far as what's happening in Montgomery County, and I think it's happening everywhere, I keep that in mind. I don't see this as they haven't selected me, right? I'm just a pawn in this whole fight. The other teachers too are Muslim. I don't know what countries their families are from, but they're Muslim. And the fourth is an African American teacher whose father is Randall Robinson, and apparently was very big in the fight, anti-apartheid fight in South Africa. So this really has nothing to do with me as an individual. But what they're trying to do, I think this started locally. Of course, it started long before, but the tipping point was the latest rally in Washington, D.C. in support of Palestine. That was the biggest grassroots rally that I have seen in years. And I go to rallies, I go to protests, I get arrested for everything. Every social justice issue, I've probably been there. And this one in particular, if you looked around, it was multi-age, it was multiracial, right? It was every religion was represented, and I think, and it happened everywhere around the world, and I really think that the Zionists are on notice. And this is a way that they're striking back locally to try and silence educators, because who are we? We represent, right? We teach everybody. And they know we're willing to teach everybody who comes through those doors, right? Whoever you look like, wherever you come from, whatever your needs are, we will try to meet those. And I think that this is a way that you all were saying, is to try and quiet us down. They've told us that we're not allowed to talk to anybody in MCPS public schools. There are 15,000 teachers. That doesn't count the custodians or the paraprofessionals or anyone else, right? So then I'm supposed to stop my life? But teachers are afraid, because now all the other teachers are like, am I going to be next? And it has created a chilling effect on the teaching staff of many schools in Montgomery County. They're afraid to talk about anything that's important. So that's where I think you're right. Even for those of us who don't have a faith, it is a matter of standing up and not being afraid, and reaching out to people that who aren't Muslim, who aren't Jewish, who are there and are willing to listen, even if what you hear from them sounds off. Maybe it's off because they don't understand, just as you were saying about that vice principal. And don't give up on that. But anyway, there's lots we could say, and I'm happy to talk with anyone about the situations.
Thank you as well. I honestly think that we are at a moment by the way, it wasn't really cable news that elevated the issue of Palestine even this term around. It was this young generation, the TikTok generation, that I thought that was a hopeless generation, but you proved me completely wrong. So hats off to you, and clapping to you. that really people in power, whether it is media or politics, their power depends on basically subserving to power, and therefore they will never really stand up for issues of justice because that goes against their own interests. But I really believe that we are at a point where we are at, who has ever seen the movie Horton Hears a Who? All right, well, you guys are revealing your age. Like, Horton Hears a Who. Yeah, we are actually at that moment, right? That like everybody has a voice, but no one could hear. Horton couldn't hear them. And they all had to synchronize their voices and elevate their voices and sing the same tune so that Horton finally can hear them. So for the last 75 years, we have a lot of small voices, but the truth of the matter is, it's not that we didn't have voices, we were just silenced. And we could not be published, we could not be interviewed, we could not be, and nonetheless, now finally, they're like, oh, let me see, actually these people have a voice. So if you have not watched Horton Hears a Who, and the issue of Palestine has been weighing very heavily on you, that kind of rhyme, go and watch it. It has nothing to do with politics, but it's useful, it's helpful. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to support that with this true story. I at one time wrote a letter to Barbara Mikulski when she was a senator, explaining, about how the Palestinians were being oppressed. Her staff wrote back, must have been a canned letter about, yes, like you, I support the Israelis and blah, blah, blah. And I wrote a second letter in which I said, did you even read my first letter? And detailed point by point everything I was saying. I got back a letter this time from Mikulski in which she said, I learned a lot from your letter, but I have to tell you something. If you're the only one who's going to write these letters, nothing's going to change.
Exactly. No, 100%. And that is why when I actually gave this talk, I said, how many people have talked to elected officials about the issue of Palestine? By the way, in this room, how many people have talked to elected officials? Okay, that's actually, I'm truly impressed. I'm very impressed. The last time it was 3%. So now it's actually more than 60%. And really, it's impressive. All right, so this is a question. If Israel has committed ethnic cleansing and genocide since 1948, why has the Palestinian population grown to over 7 million in the West Bank and Gaza and 14 million worldwide? The short answer is they just haven't killed enough. Can you please elaborate, why have, since really you are saying and you are accusing Israel of all of these horrible and horrific things, that I have had this idea of Israel being this only democracy in the Middle East and the only civilized amongst all of these hoodlums and terrorists and murderers of the Middle East, and our job is to really save Israel. How come all of these Palestinians, they just keep sprouting up?
Palestinians procreate quicker than they're killed.
Yeah, right. Well, that's one thing. But because, in short, genocide is defined by intent, not by results, right? So just because they haven't killed everyone off, it doesn't mean that. So, for example, in the most recent iteration, Israeli leaders have done the work for people who are investigating the crime of genocide because they've made their intent clear. And the same would apply over the past decades. That there was a deliberate plan in 1948 to rid the land of Palestinians. There was actually plans that went area by area, how to go about it and how to drive them out and so on. So that's where the definition of genocide comes from. I don't know if anyone wants to elaborate, but and they refer to it as an ongoing, right, an ongoing genocide.
So the third question, and we will be done by 4:15 maximum. So one is, what does Israel want and what do the Palestinians want? That's that. So in that, Israeli forces are reported to be flooding Gaza with seawater under the pretext of destroying tunnels. Could this result in long-term destruction of groundwater and impact agriculture? Can you expand on the environmental climate catastrophe this could impact in the region? With that, can you please talk about the gas reserves off of the shores of Gaza, the pipeline, the trade routes? Is that what is motivating this latest offensive? I know I don't know if you are an expert on it or not, but well, you have a Ph.D. in environmental, so that's perfect. So no offense, I'm sorry to put you on the spot. And the second thing is, well, I mean, what would be a reasonable thing for the Palestinians to expect? What do they want? I mean, you know, we've given them Gaza, we've given them the West Bank, we've given them some refugee camps. What else do they want? What would be enough for them?
Wait, what was the last question?
What do the Palestinians want? So what is the environmental catastrophe that is going to happen?
Do you want to talk about the environment?
I don't know if the flooding of the tunnels will worsen the environmental problem. The environmental problem, I mean, has a lot to do with excessive groundwater withdrawals, which cause infiltration to come into the aquifers from the sea, which is very polluted because Israel's siege means that they don't have electricity or the necessary parts for the maintenance of the waste treatment plants. So all the waste goes into the Mediterranean Sea, only at best partially cleansed. So the sea is very badly polluted, the aquifers are polluted. I think at least 80% of the water resources of Gaza are unclean, and not fit for human consumption. And now with the electricity, with the siege on electricity, it's getting worse and worse. The desal plants that were supplying clean water are unclean, are not working. So people are forced to drink contaminated water, and the rates of diseases are getting, going ballistic. So I'm not an expert on the tunnels, how that might affect the water, but it's a huge problem that is part of what Dov Weisglass mentioned about. It's actually worse because now they are starving people,
I'd like to answer the first and last question. First off, what does Israel want? Israel wants to be the governance of all of Eretz Israel, by which they mean including the West Bank, Gaza, Judea, Samaria, etc., etc., and that they would be a state that was a state not of its residents or its citizens, but a state of the Jewish people. This has now been encoded officially into Jewish law. It was always part of the Zionist project. It's now been made the official law. What do the Palestinians want? The PLO charter, and the PLO represented all of the resistance groups at one time. The PLO charter says that it wants a democratic state of its citizens, and that those citizens would have their rights protected, not only their individual rights, but their traditional religious rights for the traditional communities, and that it considers as natural Palestinians all of the residents of Palestine before it uses the word Jewish or the Zionist invasion. The problem is it does not say in the charter when the Zionist invasion was. So some people say, oh, that must be 1882, oh, it must be 1917, oh, it must be 1947 or 48. All right, that's a flaw that it doesn't say. But it says that after this state is established and stabilized, immigrants will be accepted. People like Jews who can't find protection elsewhere, as long as they accept a democratic society in which everybody is equal and there's no supremacy, Jewish supremacy, they also could be citizens. And all of the people who came after the unstated date of the Zionist invasion also would be allowed to stay if they agreed to that as well. That's what the Palestinians want. I believe it's also I think it's what almost all Palestinians want. I'm not denying there's some Palestinians who are anti-Semitic, but they're the exception. And I know a lot of Palestinians.
Yeah, I would just add to that. I mean, you can see from the enormous pushback from Zionists with "for the river to the sea," right? That Israel, absolutely, just echoing everything you said, does not want a state, you know, a democratic state for all of the people who live there, right? And that this is very much, they stated again and again their intentions very clearly, which are genocide and ethnic cleansing. And so I think if you could just see the huge focus on that phrase and all of the attention on that phrase shows how threatening it is, right? This very concept of a single state in Palestine, right? And so, yeah, they've been very clear. There's zero interest in the two-state solution, no matter how our out-of-touch government, you know, keeps hammering that and talking about that. And then just one other thing I wanted to say about the environmental impact, and I didn't get a chance to talk about this, but I'm sure you've all heard, right, that part of the Zionist claims is that they're indigenous to that land, which is like extremely flimsy evidence, and like the vast majority of Israelis are not even religious, and yet they believe that God gave them that land, right? Like that's the truth. And so so what was I saying with that? Oh, I'll come back to it. I think I lost my train of thought.
They're not religious.
They're not religious, but they say God gave them the land anyway.
Right. Oh, the indigeneity piece. Thank you. I'm very sorry. So yes, it's that indigenous people, and I'm not trying to essentialize indigenous people or paint them all with a single brush in any way. But overall, I think it's safe to say that people who are indigenous do not treat people or the land, right, the way that they are treating, burning down olive trees, you know, the utter destruction to the land, right? That to me is something that really invalidates, you know, and there's so many other reasons too, but it's one of those things, right? That willingness to do that massive environmental destruction and, you know, have swimming pools in the desert and really, you know, just so out of touch with the land, right? That to me is a real claim against this kind of indigeneity. So I just wanted to add that piece.
So with that, we are getting to 4:13.
Can I just say something?
Yeah, I was just going to add for the person who asked about gas. I was looking up the figures, but there's 1 trillion cubic feet of natural gas off Gaza's coast. The first was discovered in 2000, and then much more were discovered in recent years. And then, you know, in this most recent piece in Reuters, Israel was giving the nod for the development of that unilaterally, without, it's supposed to, of course, be doing it in conjunction with the Palestinian Authority, etc. But none of that is happening. So yes, resources play a huge part in this as well. And then to the question about the impact, yeah, it's been catastrophic. I mean, in this most recent assault on Gaza, Israel has destroyed the infrastructure completely. The sewage treatment plants, the water, so everything, all the sewage is spilling out into the streets. The bombs and the bomb debris, and especially as it's raining, is all going into the ground and the soil. As I said, 22% of all farmland by satellite imagery analysis has been destroyed. I could go on. So we have yet to get a full, you know, the breadth and scope of the impact, but it's just been completely catastrophic so far. You wanted to add something?
Yeah, I just want to go back to what can we do, and you know, we talked quite a bit about this, but a crucial thing is to join organizations, join the American Muslims for Palestine, join JVP, like Leah said. JVP has members who are not Jewish, has Muslim members and people of no faith and Christian members. What is it? The Council on American Islamic Relations. By the way, I would highly recommend that you invite Zainab Chaudhry from, I don't know if you've had her already.
She's giving a talk somewhere else, but she was supposed to be here.
So please join organizations. That's a way to, you know, have your back. They will have your back, and they will connect you with other allies.
So to continue, we're done. One thing is, There are actually Israeli companies that have started advertising for beachfront properties in Gaza already. And there are people, and I'm not, I actually have snapshots of pictures of get your new beachfront property in Gaza. So this is what we are talking about already. There are some of gas rights that have already been granted to some Western companies off of the Mediterranean. So there are a lot of these things, and these things come as a shock to us. So you're like, what are we talking? This is unbelievable. This is public record. This is not like conspiracy. You can actually look it up. But with that in mind, there's always hope, and there's always resilience. And as people of faith, and as people who seek justice, it is us who get to decide what happens. And our voices in America, when we basically veto, we then become complicit with any child that gets killed in Gaza. And therefore, we have the unique responsibility, duty, and really power to make a difference. Whenever America came and said, Shamir, Bush says to Shamir, you either stop the settlements or I will stop US aid. Shamir said, I'm going to continue with the settlements. 10 days later, Shamir stops building settlements. Why? Because Bush told him to do so. So it's not that they are immune from our pressure and what we are able to do, but the question is, do we exercise that pressure or not, right? So that is one. We have the power if we wish to exercise it. So we are as powerful as we think we are, and we are as powerless as we think we are. With that in mind, this is a call of education, a call of really recognizing what the issue at hand is from multiple different faith groups or no faith groups, and justice and a human issue. I would like to ask Imam Tarif to come and give us a word of hope and a prayer to conclude this. And with that, I really thank you for educating and enlightening me. Jazakumullah khair. And blessings to all of you and peace to all of you. And have a good night.
Salam Alaikum again. And what a beautiful, beautiful afternoon with all these beautiful souls. And I really mean it. I take inspiration every single moment. I witness what we call soldiers of God, right? There's a beautiful verse in the Quran that says, no one knows the soldiers of God but He. Have you not witnessed an awakening across this earth of the soldiers of God that speak for justice, that speak against oppression, that are really deeply human? Because ultimately, what's the definition of being human but to feel the humanity of somebody else? Many of us are struggling with this. That's why this is such a watershed moment. I can tell you, brothers and sisters, I think of this for myself, even my own family, because my dear brother Yassine, we were talking about this before here, and we said we needed to be awakened. Our families are there struggling, right? And we were so comfortable in this life, we forgot, right? We carry the pain inside of us. We carry the deep pain for what has been happening to us for generations as Palestinians, for the cause not being recognized, for our humanity not being seen. But you know what? We needed the awakening. And what has been sent out of Gaza is a transmission of waves of awakenings. They really are saving us with their faith, with their fortitude, with their strength, that people, young people in particular, are saying, whoa, what is it that inspires people that despite all their pain and brokenness, physically, that they're able to endure and say we belong to God, and it's still alhamdulillah despite them crying. And the pain is unconscionable. It's on us. And I ask the question, in this moment, this watershed moment, because life is short. Life is short, and Allah says, God Almighty says in the Quran, we created life and death to test you. Sooner or later, we're going to leave here. And Malcolm X said, if you live for nothing, you fall for nothing. So the question is, we've learned about faith, our scriptures, and all of our beautiful traditions, Jewish, Christian, Muslim, any philosophy. We learn about justice and human rights and standing for the oppressed. But the question for you and me, before the sun sets on our lives, what are we standing for? Right? So it really is, it's not just about the liberation of Palestine, and it is the longest standing illegal military occupation in contemporary history. In fact, for every soul in America, for why Palestine, it's because we're funding that occupation. the Israeli occupation. Every single dollar that we pay is contributing to this genocide that is not new. So we have a moral obligation, and the question is about moral clarity and consistency. Are we morally consistent and spiritually consistent? So it is a question of faith. And I asked the question, what would Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, having witnessed this darkness, this genocide, have done? What would Jesus Christ have done? What would Moses have done? For those of us who say we're people of faith, faith is about standing up and wiping the tears of those who are crying, healing those who are broken, and standing up for justice, and speaking truth to power. Absolutely. As opposed to living a life of convenience. So it is for us, brothers and sisters, and ultimately, God is watching. And who said that we need to tremble for knowing that God is just? God is just. And God is not aware. And one day we have to report, and we have to stand before God and answer the question of what we did when we witnessed oppression, when we witnessed the dehumanization of human beings. What have we done for Gaza, when Gaza was crying, and was brutalized, and was subjugated, and was bombed day and night, when our children were crying. I'll never forget the sight of that old man who was in front of the multiple coffins of multiple children were slaughtered. And he says, tell God about what happened, right? That should be, brothers and sisters. That awakened me myself. So today I say in conclusion, before I conclude the prayer, Jesus Christ, Moses, and Prophet Muhammad ﷺ would have done more than just pray. They would have prayed, for sure. They would have dug inside and asked the question, what do we do today? They would have stood with the oppressed. They would have stood with Gaza, because Gaza is occupied, Palestine is occupied. They would have stood for justice. May we be among the people of justice before it's too late. So let us raise our hands in our own ways, pray. I invoke God, Ya Allah, you are the most merciful, you are the most gracious, you are the most powerful. We invoke you and beseech you by every single name, beautiful name, and perfect attribute of yours. You are the possessor of power. We ask you, O God, O Allah, to bring an end to the suffering of our brothers and sisters and families in Gaza and in Palestine. We ask you, O God, because you are called the protector, protect every soul and every child and every infant there. We ask you, Allah, you are the most gracious, you are the most, the infinitely merciful to wipe every tear. Soothe every broken heart there, every broken soul there, every broken body there, Ya Allah. Ya Allah, you are the healer, you are Al-Jabbar, heal their brokenness, Ya Allah. We ask you that you heal the broken hearts of everyone here who has family there, who is shedding tears, who is in grief. We ask you, Allah, that you soothe their pain, that you join them with their families. We ask you, Allah, that you restore every family, with their lost family members, Ya Allah. You are the God of justice, Ya Allah. We ask you, Allah, that you bring an end to the system of occupation, to the system of subjugation, to the Zionist system of oppression that has been exercised against our Palestinian brothers and sisters and families for decades, Ya Allah. We ask you, Allah, to be with the people of Gaza, to be with the people of Palestine, to be with the oppressed, to be with those who are broken, Ya Allah, to make them know that they're not alone. We ask you, Allah, that you grant liberation to the Palestine, Ya Allah, and those who are occupied, that you be with every single human being, Ya Allah, who's struggling, Ya Allah, every Muslim, every Jewish, every Christian soul, Ya Allah, every family that is in mourning, be with them, Ya Allah. Help us do more than pray. Help us be a people of justice. Help us align our words with our actions, Ya Allah. We ask you, Allah, that you heal our brokenness and make us vessels and beacons of justice, of truth. Make us never ever forget the suffering of our brothers and sisters in Gaza, Ya Allah. Let their suffering not be absent from our hearts and our souls. Make our hearts swell with bitter compassion for their suffering, Ya Allah. Make us stand up today before it's too late, Ya Allah. Save us, Ya Allah. Save humanity, Ya Allah. Save Palestine. Save Gaza. Allahumma ameen. Oh Allah, bless this gathering, Ya Allah. Make us leave here with courage, with inspiration, with faith, Ya Allah, that we believe in your promise, Ya Allah. Make us, Ya Allah, strive day and night for good, not minding, Ya Allah, when things happen, but believing in your promise, in your capacity, in your power to fulfill your promise that you shall bring justice and peace to this earth. Allahumma ameen. Allahumma ameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Assalamu alaikum.
Well, thank you very much. This is the end of that bit. Before going there, I want to thank one person, and that is our Imam Muhammad, who guided us throughout this, and I really want to thank him. And I also want to thank quite a bit distinguished guests who are here, like Robert Cook from NINIA organization and his friends, and many others, and especially to the speakers. And where is the moderator? Probably he went for surgery.
I'm thinking he went to. Oh no, he's right there. He's right there.
And Reverend Caseman is here also. So we want to thank all of you who thought it important that this is very critical for all of us. And I want to especially thank the speakers to take their time to come here and tell us about the whole issue and the solutions and all that. And thank you very much.